Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. We've got excellent news for Ukraine. European Union leaders agree to open membership talks with Ukraine. So up until this point, Ukraine has just been a membership candidate, but now they're officially on the path towards EU membership. This is a process that normally takes years, as countries have to implement economic and legal reforms before they can integrate into the EU bloc. Here's what President Zelensky has to say. This is a victory for Ukraine, a victory for all of Europe, a victory that motivates, inspires, and strengthens. And President Zelensky wasn't at the EU meeting. He was actually asked not to attend. The reason why is Putin's puppet in the EU, Viktor Orban, has been saying for months that he was going to block this vote. So the Europeans had to bribe him. I'm sure Viktor Orban is, of course, taking money from the Russians, but maybe not 10 billion euros, which is what the EU unlocked and gave to Hungary to get Viktor Orban to play along. So what Orban did is he didn't vote for or against it. He just walked out of the room, in protest, I guess, but it was enough for Ukraine to get the votes in order to get to this next step in the process. But Viktor Orban isn't done causing trouble. EU leaders failed to agree on a 50 billion euro aid package for Ukraine and on a renegotiation of the EU budget. So Viktor Orban for 10 billion euros was okay, letting Ukraine get to this next step, but not okay with a 50 billion euro aid package. And I don't think it can be overstated how important it is for Ukraine to join the European Union. This is essential for their post-war recovery, given that millions of their citizens have settled in other European countries as refugees. I don't think many of these people would come back to Ukraine unless it became an EU member, had the same legal protections, and was on the same economic system with the euro. Additionally, Ukraine is going to need the European Union's help to tap their oil and gas reserves in the east and along Crimea. This is what Russia is trying to steal. This is a win-win for both Ukraine and Europe if they can integrate, if they can tap and draw for themselves the oil and gas reserves of Ukraine. Partially, this is what this war is about. Russia is trying to stop this union from happening. So let's now get to the main event. Kremlin showcases Russia's parallel realities in Putin's marathon press conference. So Putin holds this 4 or 5 hour press conference every year in December. This used to be one of his favorite things to do, but last year he canceled it because he didn't have anything positive to say. And for some reason he thinks this year is better. I dispute that, but let's go ahead and get to the highlights of this conference. Putin flaunts alleged military successes, claims Russia is doing great. So let's recap the last 2 years. They failed in their thunder run to capture the capital city of Kyiv. They failed to take Sumy. They failed to take Kharkiv. Last September, they got their asses kicked and lost the Kherson region. Last November, they lost the city of Kherson and the North Bank. They lost Snake Islands. They pulled out of the Black Sea grain deal, and Ukraine is now getting their grain in and out anyways. So what has Russia accomplished? And Russian propaganda has spun this into a victory that because they're still holding territory, they're somehow winning. Here's a summary of the press conference from Anton because, of course, I'm not going to listen to Putin talk for 4 hours. Here are the highlights. Putin continues blackmailing the world with a long war. Russia does have the resources for a protracted war. Putin kept mentioning that the EU and the United States might stop or reduce giving aid to Ukraine. This is something the Kremlin and the Russians would really benefit from. So they're using this in their propaganda to raise the spirits of their own soldiers and people. By wavering in our support for Ukraine here in the West, we are extending this war. More people will die because here in the West we are fighting amongst ourselves about should we continue militarily supporting Ukraine. This is giving the Russians hope that they can win this war. As far as the occupied territories, Putin promised to invest billions and trillions into the occupied territories, mentioning that Russians who decide to move to Kherson or Zaporizhia will get some kind of financial motivation. Russia might also confiscate the homes of Ukrainians who fled these territories, because there's a war going on. This way, the population replacing them will be loyal to Putin. This is the big one. Putin mentioned that the number of Russians on the front lines in Ukraine is now 617,000, saying that over 480,000 were recruited into the Russian military this year. Russia is achieving this by recruiting ethnic minorities, residents from poor regions, convicts, migrant workers, so forth and so forth. So this number of 600,000 is interesting because Putin has an incentive to both lie and say the number is higher, but also lie and say the number is lower. Is the true number of Russian soldiers in the occupied territories of Ukraine 600,000? Well, it might be 400,000, and Putin is lying, saying it's 600, in order to intimidate the West. Convince the propagandists that Ukraine is a lost cause. Look, there's 600,000 Russian soldiers there. Ukraine is never going to defeat them all. But Putin also has an incentive to lie and say it's lower. What if the real number is 800,000? And he's trying to sell it to his own people that it's a lower number, it's still a special military operation, it's not a real war, nothing to worry about. Or maybe 600,000 is the actual number and Putin for once is telling the truth. So let's quick address stupid comments like this from idiot David Sachs. If Russia lost 90% of its army, why didn't Ukraine bust through Russian lines in a successful counteroffensive? It should have been easy. I stated this in my last video, a declassified intelligence report saying that Russia has lost 90% of its original pre-invasion army. This is why Putin is bragging about conscripting 500,000 new men. If Ukraine has killed 300,000, and there's currently 600,000 soldiers in the occupied territories, yes, Russia is regenerating with conscripts, with the 300,000 men from that partial mobilization last fall. I don't think David Sachs is actually this stupid. He's just a Russian propagandist repeating this lie, really low-hanging fruit for casual observers of this war on social media to say, oh yeah, this doesn't make any sense. Ukraine is lying, Russia is obviously winning. Don't believe it. So when it came to this press conference, in the background there was a television showing texts from ordinary Russians. Why is your reality different from ours? Viewers challenged Putin at the press conference. And of course, these were all screened by the Kremlin, probably even written by the Kremlin. But Putin allowed this screen in the background, having unusual texts, to give the illusion that this was a free and fair open press conference, that real ordinary Russians are allowed to share their thoughts and messages with the dear leader Putin. So I'll share some of these bizarre texts that appeared on the background. Why is your reality at odds with our lived reality? Here's a good one. Why does a tray of eggs cost 550 rubles in Dagestan? The price of basic food staples has been skyrocketing in Russia the last 2 years. At the moment, people are really upset about the price of eggs. Here's a good one. What is stopping us from destroying the US and all of its friends? The answer is nuclear deterrence. The UK and France and the United States have nuclear weapons, and despite what they say on Kremlin State TV, Russia can't go to war with NATO. For sure not a conventional war, and if it was a nuclear exchange, they would lose that war too, but hundreds of millions of people would be killed. So I'm answering this question for whoever submitted this question to the president. And Putin wanted to make it crystal clear to the entire world, the Russian people, but also to everyone living in the West, there will be peace only when Russia achieves its goals. And Putin declared in this press conference, the city of Odessa is a Russian city. Russia is never going to stop until they control the 4 territories they annexed, plus a couple more territories. So the Russians are saying the bare minimum before they would even consider peace talks or negotiations. They want the territorial boundary of the Donetsk Oblast. They want the city of Zaporizhia. And to get to Odessa, this is what Putin said, you've got to retake Kherson, capture Mykolaiv, get to Odessa, and then of course the Russians want to link up with their forces in Transnistria and also absorb Moldova. I've mentioned this before, but it's worth reiterating. The city of Zaporizhia is 740,000 Ukrainian citizens. Kherson pre-war was 280,000. Mykolaiv is almost 500,000. Odessa is almost 1 million. And Moldova is 2.6 million people. So this is the Russians. Putin telling the world, I'm not going to stop killing people. I'm not going to stop until I get all of this land and all of these cities. I don't care if I have to destroy the cities. I don't care if I have to kill all these people. The Russian military will not stop, will not agree to negotiations or peace talks until they have all of this at the bare minimum. And Ukraine is never going to politically allow this. 74% of Ukrainians are against territorial concessions. But it's still up to the Ukrainians. As long as they want to fight, it's the responsibility of the West, of NATO, of democracies to continue supporting Ukraine. And here is NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg explaining what's at stake for the West.
If Putin wins in Ukraine, there is a real risk that his aggression will not end there. Our support is not charity, it is an investment in our security. The only way to reach a just and lasting solution is to convince President Putin that he will not win on the battlefield. And the only way to ensure that President Putin realizes that he is not winning on the battlefield is to continue to support Ukraine.
If the Russians are allowed to keep a square inch of territory in Ukraine, then these wars will never end. The Russians will just keep going until they have any territory that once belonged to the Russian Empire. The wars in Europe will continue for decades as Russia is retooling their entire society, brainwashing children in schools, getting 8-year-olds ready for the military in 10 years to take Finland, the Baltics, Poland, parts of Romania, wherever. This is interesting. In a first, Russia strips naturalized citizens of their passports. This was a law passed by the State Duma back in October, and this is the first time Russia has taken away citizenship from their citizens. So when this law went into effect, it covered 60 crimes as grounds for losing Russian citizenship, including spreading fake news about Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So this is a tool from the Kremlin to threaten their own people, to keep them in line supporting Putin. Because there's now 60 crimes where if you say or do the wrong thing, you now become stateless. You have no citizenship anywhere, meaning you have no rights anywhere, and the Kremlin can do anything they want to you. So what I think the Kremlin has done is the first 2 Russians to lose their citizenship were on drug smuggling charges. So this is a test run to take away citizenship from 2 Russians. If there's no big pullback or people get used to this idea, then they're going to start doing it to any Russian who spreads fake news about the war in Ukraine. And we need to talk about these migrant workers being tricked into joining the Russian military. Here's a translation from Anton about a Nepalese man who got more or less duped into joining the Russian military and ended up on the front lines. He was taken as a prisoner of war in the Zaporizhia region, and this is what he tells the Ukrainians. My name is Pratik Poon. I'm from Nepal. I came to Moscow 3 months ago on a student visa. After that, we heard about the Russian army, and one of the agents sent us to the army. We didn't know anything about the contracts or what was happening in the war. I joined the army because I listened to the agent. After a month of training, I was sent to the battlefield. I am now in Ukraine. I ask other Nepalese not to go to Russia and not to join the Russian army, so as not to be sent to the war. They will tell you that you will earn a lot of money, get a Russian passport, and many other things. Money and a passport are not everything. You live in Nepal as good people, but if you come here, you will see that the war is not like that. Nepalese who come here think that they will make good money, that the war will end quickly, and then they will stay in Russia. They told me that too. But the war is not over. It is very dangerous here. You will die. There is danger everywhere. So do not join the Russian army. Do not participate in the war on the Russian side. So he was lured to Moscow on a student visa, and as soon as he showed up at the university, an army recruiter kept checking in on him, telling him, if you join the Russian army, you'll make good money, you'll get a Russian passport to stay here forever, and we'll use you in a support role probably. When in reality he got a month of training, he'll never get a Russian passport. Maybe he got an initial payments, but I'm sure he was never going to be fairly paid, and he was immediately put on the front lines to be used as cannon fodder. What else is going on? Finland shuts Russian border again over migrant crossings. Finland shut down their border for 2 weeks. They reopened it, and immediately the Russians started dumping migrants, refugees, off at the border. This is Russia's strategy to destabilize the European Union. They're paying for it. They're busing these people, mostly from the Middle East and Central Asia, to the EU border, using them as a weapon of war. This is big news. The 2024 National Defense Authorization Act passed in the House of Representatives. And I find this vote fascinating because it's almost even between the two parties. So 147 Republicans voted for it, 73 against, 164 Democrats voted for it, 44 against. And the NDAA is something Congress has to pass every single year. And this is peculiar, but the United States is actually not supposed to have a standing army. It's in our Constitution, and this is what the Founding Fathers wanted. So Congress can't mess around with this bill. They have to pass this every year. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Now, the United States can have a navy, it just can't have an army. And the reason why is the founders of the Constitution wanted the state militias to be the main protective force of the United States. And when the United States fought wars, they would appropriate funds for 2 years, call up men, build up the army, go to war, but then that army had to go away. So when you think about the United States' involvement in World War I, we didn't have much of an army prior to the war, and we got rid of it after World War I was over. So it's only been since the Cold War and World War II that the United States has maintained a very sizable military in order to project power all over the world. Just a fun fact for you guys if you didn't know how important the NDAA is every year. And I have been told that there's military aid for Ukraine in the bill. It's only $300 million, and this is to extend the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative through 2024. So this isn't the promised military aid to Ukraine. Joe Biden wants $60 billion. In this bill was only $300 million. And Pentagon Press Secretary concedes that they have the option of continuing to execute on their $4.4 billion worth of the remaining presidential drawdown authority, even after the exhaustion of the remaining $1.1 billion in the replenishing funds. So under the Foreign Assistance Act, the president has this pool of money that he can do whatever he wants with to respond to military crises around the world. The problem with this pool of money, it's for everything. If there's a war in South America or war in the Middle East or East Asia, that money is supposed to respond to immediate crises. It's not meant to be the dedicated fund for Ukraine, but this is what President Biden will do if Republicans in Congress continue blocking military aid. So the United States, for the next year, can easily keep giving Ukraine a couple $100 million worth of military aid every month. It's not enough. It's better than nothing. This is what Ukraine might have to survive on until we can get a change in something. And when it comes to military aid for Ukraine being passed in Congress, I have to point out this hypocrisy. Republicans in Congress are claiming there's a crisis on the southern border. I'm not disputing this. But Congress just got back from a 2-week vacation for Thanksgiving, and now they're going into recess for a 3-week vacation for Christmas. This is what Democratic Senator Michael Benedict from Colorado has to say. You can't say that our border is a national security crisis and then skip town for 3 weeks. I'm not leaving Washington until we fund Ukraine, and I'll do everything in my power to keep Congress in town for as long as it takes. There's a war going on, and there's a crisis on the southern border. How can you not resolve this and then just skip town for 3 weeks? I understand members of our government are people too. They want to spend time with their families. They want to spend time with their constituents back in their districts. But this is incompatible. You can't claim you support Ukraine and there's a crisis on the southern border and then not resolve this issue and give yourself a 3-week vacation. This is pretty maddening. Let's get to the good news for Ukraine. Australia announces a $126 million expansion of training program for Ukrainian troops. Thank you so much, Australia. Estonia has allocated another €80 million military aid package, including more Javelin anti-tank missiles. Thank you so much, Estonia. Norway will donate additional NASAMS air defense systems to Ukraine, worth about $32 million. Thank you so much, Norway. Final feel-good clip I have for you is some Ukrainians engaging in some winter sport.
Deck the halls with boughs of holly, fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly, fa la 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 la. Don we now our gay apparel, fa la 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 la. Troll the ancient Yuletide carol, fa la 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 la.
Looks like fun. I'll call next game. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.